Welcome, venerables, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's talk, which is part of Ajahn Brahm's 2023 Hong Kong tour after a hiatus of 3 years due to COVID. But don't despair, this is a good example of impermanence. My name is John Cannon. I am the president of the Center of Buddhist Studies Alumni Association, and I am the MC for tonight. Before we continue, I just want to give you some gentle reminders. Number one, because we want to make sure that we are all mindful and in the present and in the now, please turn off or put your mobile telephone on silent or vibration mode. We don't want to be disturbed during the wonderful Dhamma talk, which Ajahn Brahm will give us shortly. Second, after Ajahn Brahm's talk, there will be a Q&A session for members of the audience to ask questions of Ajahn Brahm. Before beginning, I will give a short biography of Ajahn Brahm, but since most of you already know about him, probably more than I do, I'm going to keep this very short and brief. So Ajahn Brahm, please forgive me if I leave out something you feel is important. Ajahn Brahm was born in England. He got a degree at the University of Cambridge in his other secular life before becoming a monk. He is now the abbot of Bodhinyana Monastery in Perth, Australia, and he is also the spiritual advisor for the Bodhinyana International Foundation, Hong Kong, which is the organizer of his tour this year. He has gone forth into the Theravadan tradition for 48 years, and I'm sure he will continue for many more years to come.
Squeeze as much as you can out of me.
He is eagerly sought for to give Dhamma talks and other things online, offline, face-to-face, and he has even been to the United Nations. He has written many books which have been published into more than 20 different languages. I'm not going to name all the books. I only will mention 3. One is Opening the Door of Your Heart, Mindfulness, Bliss, and Beyond. Second, Good, Bad, Who Knows? And third, The Art of Disappearing. And this last book, The Art of Disappearing, brings me to a story of Ajahn Brahm's childhood, which he has asked me to share with you, so bear with me for the next few moments. This happened when he was 8 years old, and this story personally also reminds me of me and my mother. Okay. It was on her birthday, his mother's birthday, so he decided as a gift to go to the market and buy a live eel. Not dead, live, which he took home and spent a lot of effort and time to put it into a lovely birthday box, wrapped it up, had a nice card saying, "Happy birthday, Mommy." And then he presented the gift to his mother, and he eagerly waited for her to open up the package with the look of innocence. She opened it up. She looked in. The eel raised its head and looked at her. She screamed, and Ajahn Brahm made a strategic retreat and disappeared for a couple of hours to allow his mother to, mother's consternation to rise and disappear. And then he returned, and she did not scold him at all. Lucky him. All right. So without more ado, I want to now invite the audience to give a hand of applause to Ajahn Brahm, who will now give us a wonderful Dharma talk.
Unfortunately, that was a true story. I did have a sense of humor when I was a kid. Sometimes it went over the top, but at least I was smart enough when I offered the live eel to my mother. She did not suspect a thing. And I was wise enough to have what they call these days an exit strategy. I planned where I was going to hide afterwards. And I say a story like that, to let everybody know I wasn't born a monk like most other people. You had your fun and games in life. You did some silly, stupid things, but you weren't ever that cruel or unkind. You would always say sorry afterwards. That was a wonderful thing which I learned, that my parents would understand I was just a child growing up and they would forgive me. And that was one of the wonderful things I learned about life. You could have disciplined me and scolded me, but that didn't work at all, scolding. I would just be smart enough not to get caught next time. Instead, that they would understand I was just a child playing around. And I learned from experiences like that my parents trusted me. And so that I would learn I'd done something wrong. They wouldn't scold me. And because of that, I loved them. I mentioned earlier that one of the things which my father said to me when I was only maybe 13 or 14 years of age, he was very poor. I said this at the other this university, my other talk this afternoon in a convocation room. My father told me when he drove me back from school one day, son, whatever you do in your life, however you turn out, please know that the door of my house will always be open to you. And I never understood what that really meant. I was only a young man growing up and a boy too. My emotional wisdom was not really developed yet. But nevertheless, I knew it was important. And it's when I became a monk. As a monk, you had time to contemplate, to think about some of the things you'd heard. And that was one which came up into my mind very easily. My father saying the door of his house would always be open to me. What on earth did that mean? Because the house in which I grew up was what we called in UK a council flat. My family were too poor to actually have a proper house or even an apartment. It was government subsidized housing. And I never realized that we were poor until one day I asked my father, why don't you lock the door? And my father replied, why should I lock the door? We're not afraid of burglars. In fact, he said he was sometimes hopeful that a burglar would come in, take pity on us and leave us something. And that was actually quite true. But nevertheless, he was a very kind man. And I realized that what he really meant to say was not the door of his house was open, but the door of his heart was open. And he always added those very wonderful words, no matter what I ever did, no matter how I turned out. It was a parent's love for their child expressed unconditionally. That unconditional love was the most important part of it. It didn't matter what I did. I was his son, and that meant wherever he lived, that was my home. And that encouraged me so much to be a good moral person. I grew up in the 60s or 50s and 60s. And in that age, unfortunately, many of my friends were getting involved in drugs. I never did. One of the reasons why is one of my best friends was caught, with some marijuana. And when he was caught, I remember going on the bus home with him, and he said, my life is a mess. Sort of, it's really hard to go home. My parents don't trust me. The teachers don't trust me anymore. When he said that, I just thought on the bus journey back from school, back home, what would happen if I took some drugs and was caught? That wouldn't just distress my father. He was so sickly at the time, it would probably kill him. And because of that, because I knew how much my father loved me and cared for me, I realized I can't do that. There's no way in the world where can I do anything to distress my father or my mother. And that was one of the main reasons why I was free from the danger of drugs growing up in London at that time. And it was only later on when I did become a Buddhist and started reading about the ethics of Buddhism, which made so much sense to me, and also started meditating. The meditation teacher said straight away that drugs and alcohol and meditation don't mix. And so I gave up everything from that time. And because of that, I was never tempted with alcohol or drugs since that time. And I remember for my family, they didn't even know how to spell Buddhism, let alone know what it meant. But because from that time, I became an effortlessly moral person. I didn't want to break any rules because I never wanted to hurt anybody. And sometimes even simple things which I would do as a child, if the bus conductor never asked for the bus fare, I didn't feel obliged to pay it. Then afterwards, when I became a Buddhist, I started to think, my goodness, somebody has to pay that bus driver's salary. Somebody has to maintain the bus. And from those days on, even if the bus driver never asked for any fare, I would always, always give it. And sometimes the bus drivers were surprised. A poor boy, and I was poor, would be so honest. But I loved that honesty because that developed this wonderful sense of trust. And the people I lived with and dealt with, they trusted me. And it made life so much easier. Later on, when I became a monk, I always thought that being a Buddhist monk was about learning how to meditate and study the Dhamma. But being a monk, going over to Western monasteries for the first time, I was more skilled in mixing concrete than actually explaining Dhamma at the time, because we needed to build our monasteries. And many of those monasteries, I built myself. I had to learn many, many things, and even dealing, with some of the builders. Many of those people we got to know not only became just our regular concrete layers or brick layers in our monastery, but also they became good friends. They looked at the way that we dealt with them, always being kind, understanding, and always honest. Even once, when we were building our toilet block, we needed to do that simply because our local council in Australia are more concerned with health matters than anything else. So we built this toilet block. We couldn't afford to get a builder I was the one who built it. And I had to go to the plumbing supplier and said, look, the treasurer will pay the bills, but help. How do I do this plumbing for our building? And it was a good contract for the people who supplied all the pipes and stuff. And so they said, oh, we can help you. But what happened next was that they showed me how to do it. I was smart enough to learn quickly. And once we finished our plumbing supply for the toilets and the showers, then it had to be tested out by our local health authority. They tested it and it passed first time. I was so flush with success, as they said. Okay, you can. And then I wrote the letter, to the plumbing supplies people. And I said, the treasurer will send the check in a couple of days. But I just wanted to send a nice letter to you to say thank you, especially to Fred, who told me how to put all these pipes together and helped me so much. Thank you. And I sent that. The treasurer gave me the check and I sent it in the envelope to the plumbing place. And I never realized it's a big company. And that letter was sent to the secretary, and from the secretary to the manager, from the manager to the CEO, because everybody was surprised. Normally, you don't thank people in Australia. You just find fault and criticize. And this was, honestly, this was such a unique letter saying thank you. When it got to the CEO rang the guy, Fred, who sold me all these pipes, and said to Fred, Fred, this is exactly what we want in our company, the customer relations. What you did is wonderful. Well done, Fred. And how much are we paying you? And Fred, oh, well, it could always be a bit more. So the CEO gave him a pay rise. And then I went to see him the next day. One of the parts they'd sold were actually not the right size. And now in these offices in Australia, these plumbers have to be really tough and really big and strong. The work they do is very hard labor. And there was two big plumbers in front of me in the queue. But as soon as I went into the plumbing shop, Fred saw me and said, Ajahn Brahm, come over here. And these big plumbers said, we were here first. I said, oh no, this is Ajahn Brahm. He has priority. And I asked why? And his friend said, because the CEO of the company had just rang that morning and given Fred a pay rise. And he got me round the back. There's a big sign there that customers are not allowed round the back. And I said, I got this part, it's too small. I need some about twice the size. Oh, this is it. I said, yeah, it's about the right size. How much is the difference? Can you please charge us? And he said with a big smile on his face, Ajahn Brahm, for you, there's no difference. It taught me the power of kindness. And a simple thing like praise and saying thank you. I don't know how that works in Hong Kong and how many times people have said thank you to you for whatever service they have given for you. But when you say thank you, when you praise people, when you appreciate all the goodness they have done, look, setting up this talk here, don't know how many people have worked so hard to make this work. Thank you. And I appreciate that. And many other people appreciate it. And so part of living in the present, we do make presents and we say thank you for that. And it encourages the goodness to grow stronger and stronger and stronger wherever you go. Those of you who are married, how many times have you said thank you to your partner? Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for all the service you've given. Thank you for putting up with me. And meant it. Some years ago, I performed a celebrity wedding blessing for this lady in Malacca who had her own TV show. She was a celebrity over in Malaysia. And she was just getting married in Malacca. And she heard that I was giving a talk there, a little weekend retreat. And she said, can I come for an hour to do the blessing for her wedding? And I'm always happy, to help out wherever I can. Some people say I spend too much time helping others. I should just be resting. But no, that's not my life. Giving, you get lots of energy from. So anyway, I did the marriage blessing for her. And it was in, I think, some glossy magazine. The first time I got in a glossy magazine, some Vogue or New Idea or something, because she was a celebrity. And she was interviewed a year later. And she said the one thing which she valued more than anything else in the words of advice I gave at that service, which she has been practicing, I've seen her since, practicing for such a long time, ever since, was on their anniversary, they would meet together, or they'd just go out together in the evening, and they would offer each other these tiny presents, nothing valuable. And then they would do the forgiveness ceremony together. Didn't matter who did it first. So she would say to her husband, darling, if there's anything which I have done over the past 12 months, which has hurt you, irritated you, upset you by body, speech, or even some thoughts, or things I didn't do, which I should have done, which I forgot to do, which has hurt you, I'm sorry. I'm just not a perfect wife. I'm just trying my best. Please forgive me. And to do it with such sincerity, your partner, your husband, just forgive you. And then the husband says to the wife, darling, whatever I have done as well, which might have hurt you, irritated you, upset you, by body, speech, or mind, or things I didn't do which I should have done, I really am sorry. I shouldn't have done those things, whatever they are. Please forgive me too. And that forgiveness ceremony will be done every year with as much sincerity as they can create. So anything which has happened the 12 months before, they can let go of. They can renounce it, so they can enjoy the present moment without it being weighed down by all these bad memories from the past. And they said that kept them together for so many years in their marriage. And they said that's one of the best things they learned about the Buddhist marriage ceremony, the forgiveness. And for those monks sitting in front of me, you know that we do this as well in our monasteries. Even before I left to get on the plane to come to Hong Kong, all the monks who live with me in Bodhinyana monasteries, about over 20 there now, and they all came up to ask forgiveness. If anything we've done, and I ask forgiveness back, please forgive us, because we're parting. You never know what might happen on a trip out overseas. We also do this every year as well. And that means that we can live in harmony together. Imagine if monks, people who are supposed to be teachers, if we can't show our wisdom by being able to live together in peace and harmony with fellow monastics, that's a very bad example. But fortunately, those of you who have visited the places where I live, we can do this. We do this. And it means that we have this beautiful harmony, which is real. So that forgiveness is the way we let go of the past. How many of you are perfect people? Of course, you're not perfect. And that's why forgiveness is as important. And sometimes people, they think, well, he's not perfect, but he should change or she should change. Somehow they should do better. This forgiveness people, that just makes people lazy. They don't even try to change. But no, there's another way of looking at it. Years ago, I gave a talk, invitation at a mental health seminar in Australia. And one of the reasons I accepted this was because my audience, they had a few professional clinical psychiatrists and carers, but the majority in the audience were, they called them the clients of the health service. In other words, people who had really difficult times in the past, people who had been abused, people who had been treated terribly. And how could they let go of that past when it was so painful? And I gave them a simile. It's a simile which I heard from monks like Ajahn so many times, but I did expand it. I told people that in my life, I spent so much of my 48 years as a monk in forests. I'm a forest monk. That's why I really enjoyed a few days ago when you took me into the forest for lunch, and I spent an hour and so far that's been the most memorable, beautiful time of my trip to Hong Kong this time. An hour and a half, you told me to go off into this rock in the forest and just rest. And I just crossed my legs on the rock and meditated. And it gave me these wonderful memories of my youth as a monk in northeast Thailand and North Thailand, meditating in the jungles. I love those jungles. They were natural. You had a few mosquitoes there, but I soon learned how to deal with mosquitoes. Honestly, that when I first started meditating in the jungle, so many mosquitoes would land on you that with a fellow monk, we'd have a little competition to count how many mosquitoes you can count biting you at the same time. And I'm a monk, I'm honest with you, I'm not exaggerating. We got up to about 60 or 70. On your bare arms, bare head. And that was so irritating. And honestly, to this day, I don't know how the other monks managed to do this. They sat there and just endured. I didn't endure the mosquitoes. I realized that if we were going to meditate, let's meditate and get into a deep meditation quickly, not to mess around. And that was what I did. So you soon got to a nice, quiet state of mind, and the physical body just kind of disappeared. And then when I came out of meditation at the end of the hour, 2 hours, I looked at my bare skin, and there was no sign of any mosquito bite at all. It's like the mosquitoes have left me alone. And I thought that was just the power of meditation to protect you from mosquitoes. Later on, I learned what was really happening. When you do meditate, your mind becomes so peaceful, so still, that you hardly breathe at all. When your car is parked in the garage, it doesn't need any petrol. So that was happening with me. It was so still, I was hardly breathing. Because my metabolism went way down, the carbon dioxide coming out of my pores was so small, the mosquitoes couldn't find me. I read that in an article afterwards. So what attracts mosquitoes to a human being is mostly the carbon dioxide you secrete. The more you worry, the more carbon dioxide comes out. It's like you're telling the mosquitoes, hey, I'm over here, come and bite me. But when you're very still, they just can't see you. And Venerable, there's a seat over here if you wish. Venerable at the back, there's a seat over here. Seat number 7, it's a very lucky number. Very good. So anyhow, that's how I learned to be able to meditate in the forest. You meditate nice and peacefully, not worrying about mosquitoes, and they leave you alone. So I had some wonderful experience in those forests. So coming here and meditating in a forest in Hong Kong was brought back all these wonderful memories of the past. So when I think of the past, that's what I remember. Just the beautiful memories which inspire me. Even when I sang about praising, the people who supplied all the building materials for us to build monasteries in the West, that I also remember that when we were so honest, I remember they delivered more wood than they were supposed to. So I, being an honest monk, I took it back. And said, we haven't paid for this. And the person at the big wood shop looked at me as if I was crazy, man. He said, just wait a moment. And then he came back 2 or 3 minutes later and he said, you don't have to pay for that wood. The manager's given me permission to donate it. And also, we're going to give you, your organization, a builder's discount. So we're not builders, we're just monks. For many, many years we used that discount and we made so much money out of being honest. They trusted us and they loved doing business with the Buddhist Society in Western Australia simply because it inspired them. There were good people in this world. And so these are the things which I remember from the past. And I know how we can deal with the problems in the past. But there's one part of the past and some of the teachings we've given over those years. I didn't actually finish off with how we taught the people who were clients of the mental health service. When I said that I was a forest monk, I made the point that every forest which I've ever been in, even here in Hong Kong, in all the years I've walked through those forests, I've never, ever seen a perfect tree. I've never seen a tree which is straight, with all the branches equally spaced, with all the leaves green, with there's no leaves being eaten or with some fungus on them, with the trunk, the bark. I've always seen damage to that bark from a fire or something has hit it. I've never, ever seen a perfect tree. Have you? When I mentioned that, I said every tree I've ever seen in a natural forest is always bent and twisted with many holes in the trunk of the tree where a branch has fallen off. And in that hole It gives a refuge for birds, possums, other animals which depend upon those holes in the trees to survive. And I said, I've never yet seen a perfect tree. What I've seen is bent, twisted, and damaged ones. So if you think that you are damaged goods, that something has hindered you, some experience of the past, some unfortunate episode in the past, please know, number one, you belong. You're a twisted, damaged tree like every natural tree I've ever seen. And for those of you who think you've had a very difficult time, you're really twisted and damaged, you are my favorite trees, honestly. When I go into a forest and look for my favorite tree to sit under, it's never, ever a perfect tree. It's the ones which are twisted and damaged and got holes and cavities in the trunk. They're the ones which I like the most. So if you have been damaged and twisted, welcome. You are the most beautiful. And I say that with sincerity, which means that people have been through difficult experiences. They can feel appreciated. It's wonderful when you give similes like that and you see that each one of you are paying attention. It hits you inside. Each one of you have had difficulties in your past, which you'd rather not experience, but you have. But then I took it further. Some of the friends who have been listening to me for years take this to another level. And I put my hands up to them. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you. Because this is a story about an organization we have in Perth. It's called Assets. You know, people like acronyms. It's called the Australian Society of Survivors of Torture and Trauma. Because there's many countries, even like Hong Kong, we want to give refuge to people who've been through very, very, very difficult circumstances. Like in Australia, people who come on boats, say from Vietnam. Are there any Vietnamese here this evening? You're welcome. But I always remember this story of a refugee from Vietnam, just after the war there, came in on a boat, just really only had a shirt on his back, no assets, nothing left, hungry, tired, burnt by the sun, but was so happy to see land. He made it to Western Australia. And he always said that when he was greeted by two fishermen who took one look at this boat of hungry, thirsty, incredibly poor refugees who'd risked their life to get to Australia. And they shouted out at these refugees, "Welcome, mate, have a beer." He didn't understand what it really meant. All it was understood by him, that he was welcomed. And that meant so much to him. And the reason I tell that story, that gentleman eventually settled in the town of Adelaide, started a lovely business, and he was regarded with such esteem that they appointed him to be the governor of the state of South Australia. A Buddhist, simple man who just came with nothing, but was welcomed. And with that welcome and that friendship, that loving kindness, he paid back so many times over by taking these positions in the government where they could really make a difference to society. So anyway, this group called Assets, people come to these countries like Australia, which are quite safe. And when they come, their body is free, but their minds, they're still in the prisons of the past. What happened to them? And how they were, please excuse me, they were tortured, raped, beaten. And when you hear some of the stories, it's like chilling. As a monk, I just sometimes find it hard to understand what one human being can do to another. But I also am inspired by just how some people can rise and can actually do some beautiful things to heal others. And this was a group of people, actually most of them, they're Buddhists from my temple over in Perth. They started this group, Assets. And one day they invited me, can you come and just bless our organization? And I was intrigued. Why do you want me to go there? When I went there, I found out why. Because there's a number of things which I've taught over the year was how they treated people who were burdened with the trauma of their past. What they did was they used what they call the the opening the door of your heart simile, which I began with. They would get people who had survived multiple rape, beatings, and thought they were going to die, sometimes wished they were dead for what they had to endure. And when they felt safe, it's important with meditation, you do feel safe. No one is going to hurt you, exploit you, but they will look after you, protect your body and help your mind. That's one of the reasons I've been a monk for such a long time now. I have got a good reputation. I've been to Hong Kong, I don't know how many times. So you trust me. So when I ask you to do little exercises in meditation like this, you actually follow it. You realize it's safe and it's incredibly helpful. So these people, they sit down, they close their eyes, they make themselves feel at ease. And then they imagine their heart like a Valentine's Day heart, and the chest, pointed at the bottom with a little, little depression in the top, like a Valentine's Day. Not imagine a real heart, that's too complicated. And that Valentine's Day heart in their chest has two doors. And now you imagine those doors opening. You've got your eyes closed. This is the meditation, a mental exercise, just like the doors which you came into this hall. Imagine those two doors opening. And inside is a part of you which you're at peace with. The part of you which, you can live with. The kindness, the joy, the love, the laughter, the happiness. But outside of you, you look down, and on the hard, concrete, cold ground, you see those little girls. Who were you when you were young? Who were treated so cruelly, without respect, beaten, raped, tortured. They're outside. And then you imagine a little staircase coming down from the open doors of your heart to the ground. And then one by one, you get the courage to invite every one of those people from your past please come up the stairs. Come into my heart. You're not trying to exclude them anymore. You're embracing them. Whoever you are, whatever you've experienced from the past, the door of my heart is open to you. You're part of me. You belong. When you do this, those little beings from the past come up those stairs and into your heart, and there you embrace. And the people who have done this, when you open the door of your heart totally to your past, feel so at ease and at peace. They're never made to feel ashamed, stigmatized, lesser human beings because of what they were forced against their will to endure. And it's a wonderful way I've seen that we can use some of these Buddhist practices, how to deal with very painful experiences of the past, and bring them into our practices of how we deal with terrible things which have happened to us. And I recall just one of these ladies, I forget which country she had come from. She'd been the victim of multiple rape in some dark dungeon somewhere. And what had happened to her, she was telling one of my Australian boys, and when they were talking, he was saying, "That's terrible what happened to you. That's awful what you had to endure." And she said, "No, that's who I am. You've got no right to say that." She had totally overcome that trauma of the past. She had taken it in, and she was no lesser for admitting what had happened to her. She was this very strong, amazingly powerful woman. You cannot take away the experiences of the past. What you can do, you can understand them, bring them inside, and you become amazing people as a result. Many times I've told this story about how whenever you are in trouble in your life, whenever you have some really difficult experiences, how do you deal with them? You've been diagnosed with cancer. You've been told that one of your people you love so much is going to die. And you've lost your job. Things seem to be turning out terribly. What on earth do you do? And this is the story of when I was staying in the north of Thailand, and I would go into this beautiful cave to meditate after my one meal of the day every morning. Meditate there for 4 or 5 hours, come out for tea time. And it was a beautiful cave. But in that cave, there were so many bats. And I was saying to somebody, that is now one of my favorite smells, bat poo. I think it's fragrant. And the reason why is just conditioning. Because when I smell bat poo, it recalls those lovely, happy times meditating in a cave in the north of Thailand. But at the entrance to that cave, there was a papaya tree. And that papaya tree got every piece of bat poo as the bats flew into the cave, and got every piece as they came out of that cave. There was such a highly fertilized papaya tree. that whenever I saw one of those papaya fruits becoming mature, as a monk, I could never take that papaya off the tree myself. I could never cut it off. But what I would say to the lay supporters, hey, look at that papaya. That looks nice. And they would present it to me. So I would eat the whole papaya. It was the most delicious papayas I've ever eaten in my life. And that's where I got the story of whenever you have bat poo in your life, or dog poo, or any other poo which life gives you, please know how to deal with it as a Buddhist. You don't throw it away. It's powerful fertilizer. Dig it in under the papaya tree. When those papayas are ripe, offer it to Ajahn, Brahm, or any of the monks here. Really eat it, because that's a beautiful way of looking at the difficulties of the past. Those difficulties you've experienced in the past, that is fertilizer for your wisdom and compassion. That's how you learn. And that means that we are making use of things which we cannot change. It's the past, it's happened, it's gone. But it gives us this wonderful boost of understanding what life is really like and how to make the best of it, how to learn and grow, become better human beings. So when we learn about that, whatever has happened to you in the past, please put it in perspective. It's a story I read so many years ago. Over in Europe, people would like going backpacking. You know, they would go from town to town, city to city. And in those days, you could always get a job somewhere, sometimes just washing dishes or a simple job. But you get a job and get a bit of money, then you can go on to the next city. It's a wonderful way of touring around. And this one American was visiting the city of Vienna, a beautiful city. And he got a job in a restaurant as a waiter. And that's a really good job, because if you are kind and do some nice service for people, people give you tips. So one day, the owner of that restaurant announced to everybody who worked there, by some mistake, he'd ordered too much sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is pickled cabbage. If you are from Germany or from Austria, you love sauerkraut. It's delicious for you. There's a couple of Germans in my monastery. They love sauerkraut if they see it. For me, it's so stinky. It's like kimchi. Do you like kimchi? Oh my goodness, that stinks. That shows you people have different likes. But anyway, they'd ordered so much sauerkraut. The owner of the restaurant said, for the next week, if you want a free breakfast or free lunch or free dinner, it has to be sauerkraut. Because that's one of the advantages of working in a restaurant. You always get free food. He said, you can have free food, has to be sauerkraut. And this American, he got very angry. You can't do that to us. That's unfair. And he got very upset. And then this cook came out and took him aside and said, young man, I want to tell you the difference between an irritation and a problem. And the old chef just rolled up his sleeve, and there on his arm, you could see the tattoo marks which they gave everybody who went into Auschwitz during the Second World War. And he said, I was in Auschwitz. Every morning I woke up, I didn't know whether I would survive through that day. It was only because I was useful as a cook to everybody. That's how I survived. And he said to this young American, being in Auschwitz as a Jew, that was a problem. Eating sauerkraut is only an irritation. That meant a lot to me when I read that. How many times do we have irritations and treat them as if they're real big problems? And it doesn't help us. It just makes our life more angry, more upset, more business to do. So please know the difference between problems and irritations. If you are married, your partner will often irritate you. That's no reason to get divorced. If it's a problem, I think you know, then maybe, if it's dangerous. Otherwise, please. So many times, couples have asked me to mediate in their marriages and their problems. And I said this afternoon, I don't know why. I'm a monk. I've never been married. Even in Thailand once, I was giving this talk only a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, sorry, with COVID. And they said, Ajahn Brahm, because you know how women in Thailand are very concerned about their appearance. And they said, we can't believe you're in your 70s, or at that time about 68. Your skin looks so fresh. You got no lines, no worry lines on your face. How come? Is it meditation? And I said, no, I've got no worried lines on my skin because I've never been married. I'm being honest. But then they also said that when you are married, can you not take some of the problems away, lessen them? When people come up and they talk to me about the problems in their marriage, you know, the woman comes up and they tell all the problems in their marriage. And then the husband comes up and tell all his problems. And I say, you know, you're both defective human beings. That's why you are a match. We always want to have our partner being perfect. We're not perfect ourselves. So in other words, we learn how to be more tolerant to imperfection. I was a school teacher for 1 year, a high school in UK. That's one of the reasons why I went bald. No, that's only a joke. But when I had to set my first exam at school, as a school teacher, I never set an exam before. I asked advice from another teacher, and they gave me this wonderful advice, which I expanded as rules for life, not just for setting an exam at school. They said, if you set the exam too easy, it was in maths, so that everybody gets, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, you will learn nothing from that exam. If I set the exam too hard and people only get 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, then all your students will think that they can't do maths. You're not encouraging them. So he said, set the exam so the average score will be 70%. And I thought, what a wonderful piece of advice that was. 70% is a good score. But the most important part of that exam is for me as their teacher to look at that 30% where they made mistakes. This is parts of maths which I thought I taught them, but which I hadn't. It was me who was making the mistakes because they all sort of made the mistakes in the same area. I hadn't taught that adequately. So this was the place where I, as their teacher, could get feedback. And I thought how wonderful that is to apply to life. In your life so far, would you give it 70% or 50% or 10%, 100%? I don't know about your life, how good it's been, but the best score is about 70%. Because there, the times you've had difficulties and problems with your health, with your social life, with your wealth, with your career, the times you have problems, that is where you learn. It's a weakness here. You identify, you don't feel diminished by it, but you learn from it and grow into a much better human being. And that's why I say to any young women here looking for a husband, if you haven't found a husband yet, if you found somebody who was absolutely perfect, 100%, please drop them. You will learn nothing. If you find a guy who's 70%, he's got 30% force, but 70% okay, grab him. You understand what I mean? You're not expecting perfection, you're expecting the learning where you can grow in your kindness and wisdom about life. And that means that we can live a beautiful, peaceful, happy life where we grow. As Buddhists, that hopefully you understand there is such a thing as reincarnation, rebirth. People ask me, Ajahn Brahm, you're a scientist, theoretical physics. I would have bumped into Stephen Hawkins because the same department for years, went to lectures by his teacher, Professor Sharma, but I never knew he was not famous at that time. A highly intellectual upbringing I had. How can you believe in rebirth, reincarnation, Ajahn Brahm? So I don't believe in it. I know it as truth. Meditation is really good. So when there's something like rebirth, reincarnation, and you know this is not your only life, this is like being in a school or a university. You want to learn and grow and become better human beings, kinder, wiser, more effective as a human being. And that becomes almost a purpose of your life. You don't need certificates on the wall. It's one of the reasons why I never give certificates for anything. And if I see anybody putting certificates on the wall, why? What do they mean? Yes, I got a degree in theoretical physics, but that was so many years ago. I've forgotten most of it now. The one thing which I never forget is kindness and wisdom, peace. The most beautiful wealth which I have managed to amass over my life as a monk. I don't own any money, but nevertheless, you look after me so well. I mentioned this, I think, yesterday. When I come to Hong Kong, I never have any insurance. And people say, Ajahn Brahm, you're crazy. I mean, you travel on these aircraft, you don't have insurance. What happens if the aircraft doesn't arrive on time? You get stuck somewhere. What happens if there's an attack or a terrorist attack somewhere? I thought about that years ago. What happens if there's a terrorist attack on the aircraft in which I am flying? I have no fear. because if there is a terrorist attack, I would jump out the window, and this is my parachute. This robe is very big. It's about 3 meters long, 2 meters. Imagine it was floating down. Ajahn Brahm, what happens if it lands, say, in Afghanistan somewhere? They see you're a Buddhist and they may kill you straight away. So not easy. My burqa. But anyway, I said this years ago. I don't know if you remember it. Am I going over time? Yeah, I am, sorry. Okay, last little story. Never be afraid of aircraft explosions. Instead, see the benefits of it. If you have like a grandfather or grandma or somebody, and she dies in an aircraft explosion at 30,000 feet, there are 3 benefits. First of all, instant cremation, done on the spot. You know how difficult it is in Hong Kong to arrange a funeral service? And sometimes you have to feed people for days beforehand, a traditional Chinese service, and you have to take days off work. This is all done on the spot. Number 2, and also, what do you do with the ashes once you have the funeral service, the cremation? People have a lot of trouble trying to find a nice little pagoda somewhere where you can put those ashes, and that's really expensive. If you die in an aircraft explosion, your grandma's ashes are spread everywhere, distributed. And that's on the subject of money. How much do cremations in Hong Kong cost? A lot of money for the family. If you die in aircraft explosion, it costs the family no money at all. In fact, the aircraft company will give you payout. And if I die, I don't want people to have to waste their money paying on stuff for me. I care about, friends and relations. But the best benefit is number 3. Okay, to sum up those again, the first 2, instant cremation, ashes spread for free. You actually make money out of somebody's death. But the best is advantage number 3. If you die in an aircraft explosion at 30,000 feet, you're so close to heaven, it's easy to go the rest of the way. So that's why as a monk, you always see the benefits, the positive side of anything which happens in life. You can always learn something from it, grow out of it, make some positive statement no matter what happens in life. And that degree of positivity, is part of my character. Always be positive, except when you have a COVID test. Thank you all for listening.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much, Ajahn Brahm, for that interesting talk. I don't think I will fly for a while. We are now going into the Q&A session. I'm sure for the benefit that we could have as many people as possible asking questions, please keep your question brief, short, and concise. And we have 2 wonderful gentlemen with microphones at the back who will pass the microphone to you if you wish to ask a question. And if you wish to ask a question, we are back in school, so raise your hand. All right, the floor is now open. What? No questions? Don't be shy.
That front here. Faster, 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 faster.
Hello, Ajahn and Brahm.
Hi, nice
Very
to
good to
see
see
you.
you. What is the relationship between the brain and the mind?
The brain and the mind, that's a good question. The brain is physical. Once a being is born, the brain takes over after a few weeks before the mind is dominant. And I say that because this was the first time this happened. There was a couple, they weren't Buddhists, they were Australian, basically atheists. And when they had their second child and just brought the child home, that they told their eldest son, please say good night to your brother Peter. And so the elder son, Paul, went over to the cot, good night, Peter. And then Peter replied, good night, Paul. He was only about 2 or 3 weeks old. That's impossible, they thought. And without any prompting, Paul again repeated to his baby brother Peter, good night, Peter. And Peter replied again, this time with mother and father paying full attention. Good night, Paul. And they were so confused and concerned. That's why they came and saw the Buddhist monks. They said, are we crazy? I said, no, that sometimes, rarely, but sometimes happens. The mind of the baby is able to create speech. The brain is not. I know another example of that. This baby was born and took 7 steps and said, I am the chief, this is my last one. That's the story of the Buddha. But my favorite story, because sometimes people research this, and they found this baby who was born in United States. And as soon as he came out of the womb, it was a male. He took one look around and his words were, oh no, not again. That's not a joke. It made me laugh, but it's a real story. If you were reborn and you could speak, what would you say? And that's a sign, the mind taking over at birth. And then usually that you use the brain for most of your life, but then a few times under hypnosis, you can access the mind and its memories and its understanding. Through deep meditation, you can do that too. There's something which also happens at the end of your life, which now has a medical term assigned to it. It's called terminal lucidity. There's any sort of doctors or nurses who work in palliative care, they may have come across this. Someone who's been in a coma for days. Someone with Alzheimer's or dementia. They haven't been able to remember anything for days. And then suddenly you're visiting them and they say, where have you been all this life, all the time, Freddie? It's nice to see you, Freddie. And they haven't been able to recognize you for ages. And then a couple of minutes later, they pass away. It's the lucidity which comes at the end of your life. Well, they call it terminal lucidity. I've asked people, to please tell me if you've ever experienced that. And this one doctor just came up after one of my talks and said, that weekend, one of his patients, this was in a hospital in Perth, started to enter the dying process. Dying is, for people who are sick in hospital, it's not an event. It's a process where the body, goes into this irreversible decline. And this person, he rushed to the bedside. The person was in a coma, and he'd already been given the instructions. If I die, here's all my relations' telephone number. Please SMS them as soon as possible, or call them and tell them to come as soon as possible. And so he was calling the closest relations. He came to this man's daughter, Julie. Called her, she answered the phone. Julie, got some bad news. Your father is dying. Please come to hospital immediately. And that's when her father opened his eyes. He hadn't done this for days. And said, please tell Julie how much I love her. And then he closed his eyes and passed away. That happens. It's not common. It doesn't happen to everybody, but a significant number of people, when they're dying, the brain stops and the mind takes over, and it can actually motivate parts of the body to speak. Yes? There. Oh, there's a guy just, okay, the lady.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn, for coming to Hong Kong. And this is Charmaine. And I like what you said earlier. No poop and no papaya kind of reminds me no notice and no notice. And my question is, you have talked about the reincarnation and rebirth. And can you tell me more about it? Maybe what do you have seen, or what do you have understand, in your meditations?
Okay.
Thank you.
This was, I'm not quite sure where I got this from in this life, but I remember just once meditating, you get very deep, you're coming out of the meditation. And I asked myself this simple question. I was really peaceful. What is my earliest memory? And that is a very fantastic way of recalling your early lives or previous lives when you're in a state of meditative peace. And straight away, it's like in that type of meditation, that type of stillness, your mind just is like one of these dogs who've been well trained. Go and get my slippers, and they just go immediately and bring you something. And so this mind brought me back an early memory. I've got to be careful here. According to my Vinaya, as you monks know, I cannot make claims to any supernormal state. This is getting close, but I'm not going to go further, but I'll show you how it works. Straight away, I remembered being a baby in my pram, being pushed by my mother. And this was I was a monk in a hall in Australia. This was a memory, 40, 50 years beforehand. And it was not a memory like the memory of what you had for lunch today. This was a re-experience. It's like I was back as a baby in a pram. And I could explore it. And one of the things which I discovered there, which gave it authenticity, was everything which I saw. My sight was not as important as the smell. And I recognized my mother by how she smelt, not by how she looked or how she talked. I recognized my pram, where I spent so many hours, by how it smelt. And that was weird. But then, of course, you experienced that as long as you wanted, and then you came back out. And I checked that out with the doctors who I knew, especially pediatricians or people who look after kids, when they're born. And they were surprised that I knew that. when a kid is born, the sense of smell is the dominant of the five senses. The brain has actually grown those parts of its nervous system more than anything else. You recognize people as a baby by how they smell. If any of you people are mothers, do not change your perfume when you have a baby. You confuse the hell out of them. And it's things like that. You can go deeper if you wish. What's my earlier memory? And these are things, I never really understood this at first. Sometimes a mind can be stupid, and I certainly had a lot of stupidity. Those memories which you had by doing that kind of meditation, when I came out afterwards, I had no doubt at all this was real. It was kind of strange to me, the absence of doubt. And I was not an arrogant person. It was just, I knew this was me. And then I realized why. This is for those people who know your Theravada Buddhism. That when you get into deep meditation, when you're coming out afterwards, the five hindrances, the Pajaniwarana, are just suppressed. So they're not active at all. One of those five hindrances, the number 5, is doubt. Now I understood what doubt was. You have these experiences, they're clear, you understand them, and you never have any doubt at all. You can actually say, yes, I know. The mind is not distorted, it's powerful. So if you have those experiences after a deep meditation, you will know that was you. But I give a little, I should say this, I'm a responsible monk. If you ever do that, have a nice deep meditation, then ask yourself afterwards, what's my earliest memory? Sometimes some of my students, followers, after a deep meditation, they get memories of their past life ending. That's the closest and strongest experience to this life, your death. And that's usually very unpleasant. Not always, but many times unpleasant. And they've complained to me, Ajahn Brahm, don't ever advise people to do this again. But I do, because what happens if you do get a memory of the past, which is unpleasant, immediately to say earlier, please. And then you go back before your death in the previous life to something a bit more interesting and easier to be with. Remember, you're experiencing this. It's not that the memory of, remember what you had for lunch today again. You're not tasting it. You're not re-experiencing your lunch. It is just like a memory. You're back there. If that makes any sense to you, but that's how it feels. Okay, there's another question over here.
The gentleman as young as I am right there with the yellow.
Okay.
Continuing on this topic, is it possible for one to leave pleasantly in meditation, to leave the body behind pleasantly? So you choose the time when your mission is completed and you want to leave your body behind.
It's possible to do that, but a lot of times, what is the reason for leaving your body behind? If you are wise and kind, you can be of great benefit to other beings. That's why many of you keep telling me, please, Ajahn Brahm, look after your health. We don't want you to die yet. It's very unfair. So why do you do what you want to do? This is answering the question about the nature of your will. And this is when you really get into some deep meditation. You see, that which you took to be will, you thought was your choice, was not at all. That is conditioned by your experience, by your understanding. You're not a free agent. Much of what I say is what Ajahn taught me. I take no responsibility for it. I've been like brainwashed, but in the best possible way. That's why sometimes we think I have the freedom to choose when I die. You're conditioned and caused. And that's one of the reasons why, for those of you who know your Theravada Buddhism, 3 months before the Buddha passed away, his chief attendant, Ananda, had the opportunity to ask the Buddha to carry on. If he did, the Buddha may have lived a longer period. He needed somebody else to make that request. It couldn't come from within him. Even just the Buddha himself, when he was enlightened under the Bodhi tree, a fully enlightened human being, why did he teach? If you know what it's like to be so incredibly still in deep meditation, and you come out and you're still, you can't decide to teach yourself. You need someone to ask you. And that was Brahma Sahampati. Brahma Sahampati, sometimes people think the word Brahma means you're a god. And sometimes it's explained like that. So sometimes one of my monks said, oh yeah, I understand now. Thank God for Buddhism. Brahma Sahampati. But Sahampati, was a fellow monk with Jyotipala, who was a Buddha in a previous life, under Kassapa. This is in the Gatikara Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. Check it out. That Jyotipala eventually ordained with the Buddha Kassapa, and so did Sahampati. And they were monks together in a previous life. And after the Buddha's enlightenment, under the Bodhi tree, after a few days, Sahampati came to see his old friend, who is now a Buddha and enlightened. Sahampati was a non-returner, an anagami. And they had this lovely conversation. We used to be friends in a previous life. Under Kassapa the Buddha, I became a non-returner, and you got reborn and became a Buddha. Congratulations. Please teach for the benefit of other beings. And as far as my wisdom goes, without that request, our Buddha would have been a Pacceka Buddha. You know, even monks are not allowed to teach unless you're asked. And that was even for the great teacher, the Buddha. You suppressed your will before your enlightenment. It's so still, so peaceful. You need somebody to get it going again. Somebody to press the button, teach. And then the Buddha taught. I don't know if you understand that, but try to explain it in the best way possible. Okay, there's a question from there. Okay. Please let us know if we're going over time.
Don't worry, I'm keeping watch on the time very carefully and
Okay.
mindfully.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, I want to follow up on the discussion. So just now you mentioned the purpose of our life is to learn more as being a wise and kind human being. But why are we keep forgetting this in our incarnations? Like we have a new life and we forget this, and in our life we have to strive, like we find our individual ways to rediscover this purpose, this fact of our being. It's not a physical being, but mental. Like this discovery, what's the deeper meaning in this keep forgetting about things?
It's not that you forget it. You sometimes forget the details. Your character, your inclinations, and what really moves you and motivates you, that develops from life to life. If you're a very good person now, you usually be a very good person in your next life. This is one, it was like a little kind of a joke, but an encouragement to ask questions, which I often recite, about when somebody asked the Buddha, why are some people rich and other people poor? The Buddha gave a good answer, karma from the past. Why are some women beautiful while others are ugly? And when I said this, you noticed I wasn't looking at you, I wasn't looking at anybody. Because someone complained once, why did you mention the word ugly when you're looking at me, Ajahn? But then the main part of the story was, why are some people intelligent while other people are stupid? You may have had children and you really love them and care for them. You encourage them to be good at school, give them extra tuition, give them everything you possibly can to give them a good education, but they can't do it. Karma from the past is, of course. And the karmic reason why people are stupid in your next life is because they do not ask questions in this life. That's in the sutras. It makes sense to me. So when, oh God, lots of people want to be intelligent.
At the very back there, the gentleman right there. Yes.
Venerable, thanks for your inspiring talk and answers. I have one question. Artificial intelligence, AI, is getting increasingly powerful these days, and many people are worrying that they will lose their jobs in the future. So my question is, as human beings, how should we deal with challenges from AI? Thank you.
I know I don't think I can lose my job. And I think that's a fear which is not valid. It could take away a lot of what you should be doing, but give you a lot of freedom to do other things you'd like to do instead of what you have to do. When people were talking, I was reading on the websites of a 4-day week in some countries. How many days a week do you work? Can it not be the case that the artificial intelligence, if it really is intelligence, can actually work in harmony with human beings so that we can have less work to do? We can have more time for our family, for meditation, for finding things we really love doing in life, instead of things we have to do. So I always look at things in a different way than most people. Not fearful, but positive. No artificial intelligence, all intelligence is programmed. I mention this because it was years ago. Now, I was in a university with so-called intelligent people. But, part of what happened to me that I volunteered to do social work with Down syndrome people. And I learned so much more from them than I did from professors. They had what is now called emotional intelligence. And that's something which I've never seen artificial intelligence embrace. Not the intellectual part of intelligence, but the emotional part of it. So if you can find some sort of machine which can honestly cry or laugh, not because they've been programmed, because they see the funny side in things, then I think that intelligence will be very helpful for us. Okay, next question.
And we only have time for 2 more questions. I'm a very harsh timekeeper here. 2 more.
I can see 3 over there. Yeah, okay, go on.
Thank you, Ajahn Brahm. There is a question about, you mentioned about unconditional love from father is really amazing. I want to ask if some children, maybe because of karma, they experience corporal punishment or verbal punishment from in their life. And then when they become adult, how can they learn about unconditional love to self and others? Is confession help? Thank you.
Not confession, but honesty helps. You know, the people who gave that corporal punishment or whatever, for whatever reason, they thought they were doing the best for their kids or for whoever. And so please just, you can sort of tell your kids, look, I'm sorry I did that, but I really do love you. And when we have forgiveness as part of our repertoire of emotional intelligence, forgiveness is so incredibly powerful. There was a story recently of a woman who found out one of the people in Auschwitz, who was one of the doctor's assistants. She was a twin who was taken to Auschwitz in early 1945, she said. And here she and her twin were experimented on by Dr. Mengele. Her sister eventually died. She survived. But for her whole life, she was traumatized by that event. She found one of the doctors, she could recognize him, wrote to him and said, will you please meet me in Auschwitz? This was many years afterwards. They met together. They met together in Auschwitz. It's when it's just a museum, a tourist place. And then she said, I forgive you. And of course, he found that hard to accept. He said, but I was responsible for much of your suffering. No, I forgive you. She could let it go. So forgiveness is so powerful. We're really good people. We try to do the best. But sometimes we do rotten things to one another. This is one of the reasons why that forgiveness can always be done. There's nothing you can't forgive. And if ever you have a partner in life and he does terrible things, people ask, how many times can you forgive him? And my answer is always one more time. And that's beautiful. And it works. They're not taking advantage of you. Become this amazing, beautiful person. You're protecting yourself, but being a victim over that abuse. Not being a victim, but being a victor. Forgiving the other person. That's a beautiful thing to do.
All right, we'll take the last question over here on my right-hand side, the 3rd row from the bottom, the young gentleman with the,
Okay.
oh, just right there.
Cheers. So I guess there are many people who practice meditation here, and I wondered, do you have any advice for us to improve our meditation experience or
Be
whatever?
kind. Yeah, be kind. In other words, there's too many cruel people in meditation. They sit through pain. They're not kind to their body. They're not kind to their mind. And The example I'm going to give now is a beautiful story. This mother in Perth had a son, and the son threw a tantrum. And the son said, "Mummy, I don't love you anymore. I'm leaving home." He was only about 5 years of age. Now, this mother, this woman, she's got great emotional intelligence. She said, "Okay, son, I'll help you pack." I know some of you mothers always think that's a good option. So he packed the son's bags and said, "Oh, before you go, you know, it's a long journey in life. I'll make you your favorite sandwich." And made a favorite sandwich of the son, put it in a brown paper bag, then waved the son off at the door. "Have a lovely life, son. Don't forget to keep in contact every now and again." And the son left home for the first time in its life, went down the path of the front gate, opened the gate, turned left and down the road, leaving home for the first time. You know what happened? He got about 50 meters down the road, felt terribly homesick for his mother, who made favorite sandwiches and everything, turned around and went back, opened the gate, and the mother hadn't moved from the front door. "Welcome home, son." And that's beautiful emotional intelligence. If your mind wanders off, pack its bags, give it its favorite food. "Bye-bye, mind. Have a wonderful day." If you're that kind to your own mind, the mind just goes a little bit away from you and will miss you very quickly. It'll come back. "Hello again, mind." Never underestimate the power of kindness in meditation. You enjoy the meditation and the mind just wants to be with you. So you don't have any restlessness, no tiredness. You soon become very peaceful and very blissed out. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn Brahm. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Before I have an announcement to make in closing here. For those of you who are still eager or have not had enough of Ajahn Brahm, there is another free talk given by Ajahn Brahm tomorrow night at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, not the University of Hong Kong, the Chinese University, at 6:30 to 8:30. And it at the University Library, Chinese University of Hong Kong Library, not Hong Kong University Library. And just as same as tonight, it is free. Do they still have to register? Oh, I'm terribly sorry, but you do have to go online and register. Otherwise, good luck. And once again, thanks very much for all of you for coming, and on behalf of Bodhiana Foundation and the Center of Buddhist Studies and the Center of Buddhist Studies Alumni Association, I wish to thank you all for coming and sharing in this valuable time together. And as you all should know, from especially Theravadan Buddhists, listening to Dhamma talk does also create merit for you to transfer. Thank you very much and good night. That's it. Okay. Nice to see you again. Excellent. 4 years ago. Excellent. This was nice to do. Okay, nice to see you. Thank you all for coming.